Welcome to the Build to Scale podcast. My name is Reem Benchar, your host, and today we have two special guests joining us. Thomas Marks, CMO, and Zabe Agha, co-founder and CEO at Metrical. Thomas and Zabe, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks, Reem. Thanks so much for having us.
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking some time out of your probably very busy day to join me, and especially before the holidays. So I'm sure it's a hectic time for a lot of people, but really appreciate you taking the time to join. So excited to have you here.
Likewise, I'm especially excited given the fact that you've got your own background in retail. And so I'm hoping that some of the questions that we touch on directly align with some of the experiences that you've had.
Yes. I'm really looking forward to digging into that. I feel like we talk to people with so many different diverse backgrounds selling different products and different industries, but the retail space, I know it fairly well. I spent a good amount of time there. So I'm excited to learn more about what you guys do and hear what you have to say and share value and insights to all of our listeners. So excited to dive in. So first of all, can Zabe maybe start and give us a little bit of overview on your background?
Yeah. Again, first off, thanks for letting us participate in this conversation with you. My name is Zabe Agha. I'm the founder of Metrical. I started Metrical 8 years ago. We're in the San Francisco Bay Area, but one of the things that makes us a little bit different than most companies out here in the Bay Area is that we actually have never raised venture capital. We are a completely bootstrapped startup, if you will, that is really focused on the retail industry, but we also now touch some other verticals as hospitality and tourism as well. Our main value proposition is something that we're going to get into the details of, but the origin story of Metrical is that my background is in software engineering and product management. I used to run e-commerce at Autodesk, which is a large software design company here in the Bay Area. And after being in this large corporate environment, I just couldn't really deal with it. I'm not that kind of fish for that kind of water. And so I decided to leave. And I initially started a consulting company around customer experience that then morphed into what we have today, which is Metrical. And our core value proposition is helping retailers use machine learning and AI to find ways of being able to increase conversion and increase revenue. But the background for me, and I think a lot of the ethos of the company, is in data and really sort of understanding data, large data, if you will, or big data as they were calling it a few years ago, and then figuring out how to harness that in a way that allows us to be able to provide value to our customers like JCPenney's and Dick's Sporting Goods. And then Thomas, who's a seasoned CMO, we were very lucky to come across him not that long ago. I'll let him do his own intro, but he just started with us pretty recently.
Thomas, go ahead. Tell us more about yourself.
Great. My name is Thomas Marks, and as Zabe indicated, I joined Metrical about 3 months ago as a CMO. And for the last 12 or so years, I've been working in the e-commerce space. Kind of a return for me. I spent a lot of my early career in the e-commerce space in the travel industry with Travelocity and Orbitz and other companies. But for the last 12 years, I've been back more into physical goods, e-commerce, working with technology companies in the Bay Area in various facets. And, have been really fascinated by what's going on with AI and how that's being applied in the e-commerce space. So I was very excited to join Metrical and Zabe and the team.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate you guys sharing more about your background, Zabe. I completely understand where you're coming from when it comes to working in a corporate space. It's kind of the reason why I became an entrepreneur myself, and good for you for starting your own thing. And I know it's always a ride. I'm sure looking back, it's probably a good decision.
Very rewarding. Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity to be able to do something by yourself and also try to create something. That's the other part of it that's really amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's what powered my transition back into e-commerce as well. I was working in fintech for a company that was acquired by SAP, and the whole world changed overnight. To go from a medium-sized company to working for a global multinational. So I'm happy to be back in startup world too.
That's nice. Cool. All right. So can you tell me a little bit more about how long Metrical has been around, out of curiosity? Because I know back in my days when I was at Barney's New York and Foot Locker, I don't think I remember hearing about it. So how long has Metrical been around?
Yeah, so Metrical's been around for almost 8 years. But like I said, because we didn't raise venture capital, we never actually threw a lot of money at marketing. And so a lot of our growth has been organic and word of mouth. As you are probably aware, in retail and e-commerce, there's actually a lot of attrition at companies and people sort of leave one company to another. That's actually been a very huge portion of our growth, where people have used Metrical at JCPenney's and then moved on to Fossil, and then we're the first call that they make when they move to a new retailer. And so we've gotten a lot of growth and traction, but that tends to be a little bit slower than other companies that have had massive marketing budgets that they can throw at things. And so for us, we've taken also a pretty measured approach to growth. And because since we haven't raised venture, we're very careful about how we scale, very careful that we provide an amazing customer experience and a customer service to our customers. So we don't actually give our customers a tool that says, okay, here's a solution that's going to help you, go figure it out, and we'll give you training, and that's it. We tend to be very, very hands-on, almost sort of like a consulting team, if you will, without the consulting fees or the billable hours. And what we end up doing is providing this really a la carte solution that's at the same time very customized for each retailer so that they can figure out what's the specific pain point in their e-commerce conversion funnel, and then how do they leverage our experience, our background, our data that we have, a massive 3.5 trillion data set on different types of human behaviors. And how do we leverage that in a way that allows people to be able to figure out how to reduce friction and increase conversion in their company?
Very interesting. Out of curiosity, could you give me some functionalities or use cases? I'm very curious about how Metrical works and maybe some real life examples of how you helped some companies optimize their conversion rates.
Sure.
Or other metrics.
Yeah, so I think let me start with actually what the front end user experience ends up being like, and then we can sort of work backwards into the details of like what's actually happening under the hood. So you've been in retail, I'm sure, visit retail on a regular basis like we all do. And one of the things that hasn't really changed over the last 20 years is that the online retail experience is just mostly the same. You sort of go to most websites, there's mostly a pop-up that asks you for your email address for a 10 or 15% off coupon. Then once you dismiss that, because most people do, you're faced with the same homepage where it says, we have a sale going on, 15% off, 30% off, sometimes 50 to 70% off. And then you just sort of do what you have to do. And the problem with that approach is that it's sort of like a spray and pray. So marketers and e-commerce companies are basically taking their entire arsenal of discounts, promotions, loyalty programs, whatever that they have, and they just sort of throw it up on the screen and then hope that there's something that you will see that's going to really attract you and get you to keep on moving forward. But the fundamental issue, though, is that we live in a world with so much noise that we've trained ourselves to sort of block out most of the things that we don't care about. And so when you see that banner at the top of the site, that sort of scrolling and says, don't forget that you qualify for free shipping, we don't really even care about it anymore because one, we are sick and tired of it, and two, it's on every single website. And so what Metrical does is that we fundamentally change the e-commerce experience for a very small percentage of people. We think of everyone that comes to an e-commerce site as three different groups at a very, very high level. It's like thousands of groups, but we think of them as three different groups. And we think that there's people that are loyal customers, they're repeat customers, are going to buy over and over again. And those are people that, they're used to a certain type of shopping experience. You don't need to touch those people because they're actually just going to do what they've done in the past. And then you've got this very large majority of people that are brand new visitors. They're coming in because they saw an ad online or on television, and so they're coming to your website. But the vast majority of those people won't purchase. They're just sort of observers, if you will. But there's a very small sliver of people that are sort of on the fence about whether they will or won't buy. They're sort of, they're a little bit more thoughtful about their process, about buying, about spending money. And what those people sometimes need is a nudge to make them a buyer, to get them to actually create a cart or to not abandon their cart. And so what Metrical does is that we change the online experience just for that small sliver of people so that when they come to the website, they see the messages and promotions that are most likely to result in them not bouncing and creating a cart and not abandoning a cart. And so what that means is that you may have three different types of experiences on the website. A loyal customer like Thomas may come to a website, and because he's loyal, because he's a repeat visitor, he may not see the promotions because he really doesn't need them. If you're a first-time visitor and you are likely to bounce like most people are, then maybe you're the one that sees like the spray and pray, and we hope that something sort of catches you. But if there's that third visitor like me who's like, oh, you know what, I'm not sure if I want to spend that extra $5 or $10, we use the retailer's own marketing promotions so that we change the on-site experience specifically to drive them into further down in the funnel. And so our focus is very surgical in the sense that we don't say that we're going to customize the entire site for everybody, nor do we say that we're going to customize the site in such a way that every individual sees something completely different. We focus on that very small 3 to 7% of people that just need that extra message or that extra reinforcement in order to be able to do something else. And so that's the group of people that we go after. Now, if you're curious, like what's happening under the hood, I can get into that unless you have some questions first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious about what's going on under the hood because from what I understand, you're gathering so many data points and curious about how everything gets processed in a way where you're able to identify that specific group of consumers. So I'd love to know more about that. And then another question I would have is, this is again purely from my perspective as Reem, who has worked in retail and e-commerce. I'm thinking of like a dynamic yield, for example, which does a lot of on-site personalization. I'm just curious about maybe some potential differences, just to help our listeners who are curious and also familiar with this space understand what's kind of the potential added value of Metrical.
Yeah, let me start with that one first. So a solution like dynamic yield is very, very useful for certain types of things. If I come to a website and I've bought before, it's useful that the site knows what my purchase history is. It sort of has the ability to be able to recommend other products that I have purchased and figure out, okay, these are the things that you might like. So a solution like a dynamic yield is not something that we ever target to ever try to replace. The thing that we really focus on, and I think our bread and butter, is in the marketing and promotion space, which is that you've got a marketing team with a marketing calendar. They've got a set of promotions that need to go out on certain dates. And right now, their approach is that everybody sees those same promotions, no matter who you are. And so the difference between dynamic yield and Metrical is that while dynamic yield is sort of focused on that personalized experience of what your experience is like when you're shopping, our focus is trying to leverage machine learning and AI specifically, with the hot thing that everyone's talking about nowadays, in a way that the promotions that you see, that the free shipping reminder that you see, that the loyalty program that you see is the thing that targets you if you're on the fence. And so we don't change the fact that you came back and you see different types of recommendations. Solutions like dynamic yield do a great job at that, and we're not trying to get into that space. Our value proposition is really about what do I need to show you from a messaging point of view that gets you to potentially build a cart or to not abandon your existing cart.
Yes, and I do remember I worked when I used to be at Barney's New York before we essentially went down. We onboarded or we were onboarded by Dynamic Yield, and I do remember that personalization, especially with product recommendation, was definitely back then definitely innovative from Dynamic Yield. But the way you're explaining this is definitely there's a bit of a difference in how you're essentially helping with increasing conversion rate by really identifying that specific kind of target set of visitors. And I'm definitely curious about how you do that, because I know that's been a challenge in the past from an e-commerce standpoint.
Yeah, and for us, the thing that's really interesting is that we've come up in this age where big data and machine learning have become very popular. And so a lot of entrepreneurship is also luck and timing, and we're sort of in a very sweet spot for that. And the way that Metrical really works under the hood is that over the years, we've collected all of these different data points on what people do at certain times of day based on where they're coming from, whether it's either Instagram or Facebook, or whether it's a Google search or organic traffic. And then we know what those people are doing. We know that, when people visit a PDP, for a specific customer, does that person tend to bounce? Do they tend to build a cart? Do they tend to browse on the website? How long do they browse on the website? Like, we have all this huge data that makes up our 3.5 trillion data set. And using machine learning and really advanced statistics, what you can do is you can start then creating patterns, and you can say, okay, when people on a Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. come into this PDP from a Google search, what's the likelihood of a certain type of outcome? And so if the certain type of likelihood is bounce behavior, then that tells us something that maybe we need to figure out whether we should or shouldn't interact with that person. So we get these types of signals. And so the underlying machine learning models are figuring that out for us and then saying, okay, these are the people. There's another layer on top of that, which is sort of like our proprietary piece, which is that how do you start identifying people that are net new versus existing versus on the fence people? And then how do you sort of engage with only that third group? But those two pieces sort of come together in such a way that the behavior of the masses, or like almost like the wisdom of crowds, that becomes like the core central piece in terms of what's likely to happen. And then our second proprietary layer on top of that merges in what's the interaction and who's the person you want to actually have an interaction with.
That makes sense. That's really interesting. I mean, I'm a bit of a geek with these sorts of things because I've worked with these tools before, but definitely exciting stuff that you're doing, especially in the retail space where margins are rather thin. You don't want to have too many promotions, but I do remember that mindset of, hey, we want more sales. Let's launch another promotion and launch it across the board for anybody, whether they're actually just looking or
they're an existing customer who was going to buy anyway.
Exactly. And not being able to segment further. Sometimes we did have the data telling us that it was the wrong approach, but most of the time you can definitely speculate and say, yeah, this is not the right way to do that. But yeah, definitely a big issue you guys are helping solve in the retail space, which is, important industry.
Yeah, segmentation, I think, is sort of like key to what you're saying, which is that the way that I think marketing teams or data science teams at most e-commerce companies sort of think about segmentation today, it tends to be much more in loyalty buckets than anything else. And so you've got, your brand new customers, you're somewhat loyal. And so that's why companies have like these different loyalty tiers. And that segmentation is super important. It should still happen. The kind of segmentation that I think that Metrical enables is real-time segmentation. We've got this underlying ability so that every single individual that comes to the site, we are individually scoring each person on their first visit to first page. So we don't wait for a bunch of clicks to try to figure out what's going to happen. We say, okay, this person's just come in. We know when, we know where they came from, we know where they landed. And so let's start immediately scoring that person. And so instead of building these cohorts, which is sort of like a typical approach to segmentation, we end up creating cohorts of one, where each individual is scored. So we don't actually create clusters of groups. And even when I'm talking about like on the fence people, that's not one cohort. It's every single individual that the model is scoring a certain way and saying, okay, these are people that are going to be people that you individually need to interact with. And each individual person in that cohort of one needs a different type of interaction. And so that combined with our A/B testing allows us to figure out how we deliver the right message to the right person.
That makes sense. A/B testing was another question I had for you. How do you approach it? Because that's obviously important. You want to show incremental lifts. Yeah. What's your approach here?
Well, I love the question because I am such a nerd about A/B testing. I think we're one of the few companies that do what I think is called real A/B testing, in that every single campaign we launch for every customer has a control or holdout group. And so there's never a situation where Metrical runs where you can't tell from pure math the efficacy of that campaign. And so we always have a control group, we always have a treatment group, and you can sort of control the dial on, whether you want a small control group or a small treatment group. And whenever you control those dials, there's consequences, right? So the smaller the control group, the longer it's going to take you to be able to get statistical significance, so on and so forth. But the benefit of that approach is that you can then say, okay, for my control group, how many carts did they create? How many of those people purchased and what AOV did they purchase at, for example? And so you know what's happening in the status quo situation. But then with the treatment group, the ones that Metrical engages with that our models identified, we can say, okay, how many of those people created a cart? How many of those people purchased? And how many of those people, what was their AOV? And you can say, okay, this is how many dollars they generated. And if you just take the number of treatment visitors that you had and said, okay, if these people were converting at the control group's AOV and at the control group's conversion rate, you can just do very simple math to say, okay, because we're using Metrical, this is how much more money that we're making as a result versus if we weren't doing anything at all. And so the control group ends up being like this tried and tested method that allows you to be able to validate that what you're doing is actually real. And the thing that sort of astonishes me, I'd be sort of curious about your own experience here, is that one, people don't know how to use control groups. And two, people, even if they understand control and treatment, they don't understand things like p-values. They don't understand how small or bigger should a control group be, or how long should that run. And so we find that, people say, oh, that's statistically significant, but you'll have like a p-value of 0.3. I know we're getting like in the nerd talk here, but that basically means that you've only got a 70% level of confidence that something is actually working or not, and that's not really reliable. And so our system is figuring out how to deliver the right message, but measure it against a control group so that you know that you're actually getting some statistical significance as a result of that decision that you made in terms of who should see what marketing.
Absolutely. And that reminds me, I won't say which company that was at. It was a large retailer I used to work for. Anybody who checks my LinkedIn can try to guess which one. But there was a lot of skepticism from senior level executives on what this data meant, because the way we approached it was similar, right? We had a control group, we had a test group, we measure incremental lift, and then we almost make projections about what that means in dollar value, how much more we're driving annually through this initiative. I don't know if this is something you ran into working maybe with some retail clients. Definitely anybody who's not really fully understanding the math behind it is in my experience has definitely challenged us on, hey, did you take into account all the different factors? And there's no way this is a perfect science, which it isn't, but if we have a 95% confidence level, then we're pretty close. But definitely ran into a lot of challenge, I remember. So is this something you have faced maybe as a service provider?
Yeah, we do face it. I think that one of the things we figured out two different ways of actually explaining to people incremental revenue, and I think that that has made a big difference. One is sort of like the way that I described it, where you sort of look at the treatment group and say, well, what would have happened if these people would have all converted at the conversion control groups rates? The other way is that, and something anybody can do if they've got their own e-commerce platform, is they just look at the RPV delta or the RPV difference between the control and treatment groups for any test that they're running, and just multiply that RPV, revenue per visit number, by the treatment visits. And so that's a very, very simple way of just saying, okay, how much money did this experiment make me? Now, that doesn't take into account things like p-values, but once you start explaining to people like the different approaches that you can take, and then people start realizing there's no way to really not take that approach because it's sort of like a foolproof method to calculating statistical significance and incremental revenue. It ends up being a pretty easy sell after that.
Yeah. So I remember the good old days. It's always fun to be challenged by a CEO or someone who's definitely has an impact on the decision making process of investing in some of these tools. Yeah, this is definitely an important conversation. Yeah, let's maybe take a quick step back and maybe look at the trends you're seeing in the industry, especially when it comes to the retail space and e-commerce merchants. Could one of you tell me more about what you're seeing as big trends that are worth noting?
I mean, I think we've alluded to some of these things already, right? And so I think for a long time, most retail companies, especially new entrants into the or immature, folks in the e-commerce space, because let's face it, the biggest retailers, save Amazon, started out as brick and mortar retailers who've now moved a lot of their operations online. And so online revenue growth at all cost was the trend sort of pre-pandemic. And then when everyone was caught flat-footed in the pandemic, who didn't have a profitable e-commerce business, they all entered the fray very suddenly. And so it really changed the acquisition cost dynamic. And so I think the biggest trend that we see in online commerce right now is that it's not growth at all costs anymore. It's smart growth. It's like, how can we grow and protect our margins simultaneously? And I think that's where Metrical really comes in, right? Because if you're using a spray and pray approach and you're offering a site-wide discount to everyone who comes to your site, you're damaging your margins. You should only be lowering your margin when it's absolutely necessary to create that growth. But if that margin can be sustained with another visitor, then that's a win-win for everybody involved. I think another big trend that we're seeing, omni-channel has been the buzzword for the last several years. And I think especially in this dynamic where you have large retailers who have a large brick and mortar presence, but they also have an online presence. Yes, they're still focused on omni-channel, but they're also focused on online to offline. And what I mean by that, it's sort of a different flavor of omni-channel. And the reason why, we have customers that we're running tests where they show a negative incremental revenue because the entire purpose of the campaign was to take people offline and put them into a different channel, into the mobile app, and then hopefully use the features of the mobile app to draw them into in-store. And the reason why there's this focus on online to offline right now is because all of the data proves out that people spend more money when they're shopping in store than when they're shopping online. And I think we can all anecdotally speak to that from personal experience. When we shop online, we generally have an idea of what we're looking for, what we're going to buy, and we're content. It's easy to ignore the suggested bundling that you get in the cart, checkout phase and stuff. Whereas when you're in store and you grab the one thing that you need, but you have to walk by 30 other things on your way to cash wrap to check out, the average order value or the revenue per visit, increases. And so those, I think, are some of the top trends that I see going on in the industry.
Absolutely. And these are good points, especially the online to offline and the different behavior offline than online. That's actually a trend I've never really heard before, even though I used to work in the retail space. I think looking at the data and looking how our consumers are buying and how much they're spending online versus off in store, we could probably guess that, but it does make a lot of sense in terms of the environment they're in versus I need to buy this specific thing. I'm just going to go on Amazon and get it, or on Walmart and get it, whereas like if I walk into Like even at Costco, I know I'm going to come out to the
I was going to say the same
large
thing,
bill.
Reem. I visualize the Costco experience. And so, I go to Costco thinking I need these 5 things, and I walk out with 30 other things, and the $100 that I intended to spend is suddenly $500. So it just proves out anecdotally for me twice a month when we go to Costco.
I know at this point we avoid Costco for this exact reason, but yeah, you're right. Anecdotally, it is very relevant.
It's
For
also one
sure.
of the reasons where maybe digital native only brands that started off digital native also started to realize like, oh, wait, maybe we actually do need some stores. And so you saw this move where these bigger brands ended up realizing that, okay, we can actually increase our revenue if we actually have a store. And so they moved in that same direction.
Absolutely. I don't remember which brands did that, but definitely remember one doing that specifically where they started online, had a great success, and then they started opening stores. So the name escapes me, but
Well,
it
I
makes
can
perfect sense.
I can think of a couple of brands here in San Francisco. I mean, Allbirds started off as an online brand, and now they have, retail locations in most of the major cities in the country, and that started in San Francisco. And then, Bombas Socks is a New York-based company that started off online, and then they opened up, retail locations. And Taylor Stitch, one of my favorite brands, is another example of that, where they created, this collection of men's apparel that was geared to a really specific audience of tech workers. And then they realized if we opened, retail locations in San Francisco and LA and New York, we could draw people in and increase the revenue per visit by having people interact with multiple products instead of the one product description page that they found online through a search.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think the retail space has gone through so much in terms of changes the past few years. Even before COVID kind of accelerated digital transformation and has impacted the way these companies run. But that's an interesting take in terms of having, looking at these retailers that are starting with online first and opening physical locations. That's definitely a good point. So what types of ways are you leveraging AI with your product? I know, Zabe, you did mention the way your product is essentially harnessing 3.3 trillion data points on consumer behavior, and then you're using AI to create predictive models. Could you tell me a little bit more what types of engagements does AI really help enable?
Yeah, I think this ties a little bit into the A/B testing piece, but when you're a typical retailer and you're trying to do online testing to try to figure out what message is going to work, never mind who you're going to serve it up to, you're basically just trying to do A/B tests and maybe if you're lucky an ABC test and trying to see which message actually works the best. But the way that we leverage AI, I want to be clear that AI is a very big umbrella. So under AI, we've got things like LLMs, you've got machine learning, you've got neural networks, things of that type. AI is a very broad term, the way that people think about it. Our specific area of focus specifically tends to be in the machine learning space, and now we're actually starting to do something in the generative AI space, which is also under the larger AI umbrella as well. But the machine learning piece, which is sort of like the core artificial intelligence piece of this, is really looking at understanding behaviors. Like what do people do and what ends up happening as a result of those behaviors, and then trying to model that through machine learning in a way that allows us to be able to say, okay, certain types of people need certain types of experiences. And so our AI solution is really the machine learning that's looking at these behaviors, classifying people into these cohorts of one and building these in the segment of the on the fence people.
Yeah. And yeah, and you're bringing up a good point about AI. We talk about it all the time, and especially on this podcast, it comes back over and over again as a major trend, and everyone has their perspective, but it's such a broad umbrella. I think a lot of people mean more like LLM and, ChatGPT, Gen AI. But when we look at it, especially as an retail person who worked in retail for a while, like predictive models have been around for an actual really long time. And I remember using them, working with a data science team and, creating more of them. It's just, it does fall under AI today, which is interesting because I think a lot of people don't always realize that when they think of AI.
Yeah, and I suspect in maybe 4 or 5 years from now, we probably won't be talking about it like AI anymore. I don't know if you remember, but like 5, 6 years ago, everybody was just talking about big data. Like, big data was the term. It was the buzzword. It was like, oh, what are you doing with big data? All that sort of stuff. And what ends up happening with a lot of these technologies is that they just sort of become subsumed into the day to day. And so today we talk about AI AI because I think the chat GPTs and LLMs have made them very popular. But eventually all of this will sort of become part of the fabric of our day-to-day business. And so in 5 years from now, when we have our follow-up conversation to this, I doubt that talking about AI the way that we talk about today will be even that relevant.
It's interesting because I did a TED Talk on big data.
Oh, did you?
Probably 8 years ago. But
Full circle.
Did it age well?
I think so. I mean, a lot of it is still relevant today, maybe as less relevant than, a few years ago, but I understand what you're saying. We're probably going to talk about it very differently 5 years from now, and AI may not be the proper term anymore.
And I'm guessing, I don't remember the timeline exactly, but I'm guessing 8 years ago, big data was sort of like at its nascent stage, right? Everybody was just sort of talking about it at that point.
Yeah, and everybody was a bit freaked out about big data and how our data was being used maybe without our knowledge. I think I tried to give a bit of a fresher perspective on, hey, there's good things and good sides to it, but there needs to be a little bit of regulation and governance on how this is being used. Yeah, definitely full circle. Cool. So I did understand that Metrical recently conducted a survey of brands to better understand the state of AI and e-commerce, which I feel is really, really interesting. Can you share some of these findings? And I think that's a great way to kind of end this conversation, because I think when we talk about AI, there's that fear of having that disconnection with, the human side of things. And this is something that comes up a lot when we talk with different people and hear their perspective. But the way you're really sharing your perspective here, the way you're looking at it is actually AI can help companies be more customer centric, which is, I feel like better way to look at it. So that's love. I love this. I think that's a great way to wrap up this podcast. Tell me more about when this is going to be published, the survey, and how we can find out more about the insights and the report. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate the time today. It was such a great conversation. I love hearing what you guys do at Metrical. If anybody wants to connect with you two, what's the best way to do that?
I think the best way is for somebody to go to our website. It's metric, metric.al. It's pronounced metrical, but it's the .al domain. So metric.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. I'll link this in the description of this podcast episode. And for anybody who's been listening, feel free to subscribe and give us a 5-star review if you found this interesting, or even share this podcast episode with anybody else who may enjoy listening to it. But thank you so much, Thomas and Zabe. It was absolutely a pleasure meeting you and talking with you, and hope we stay in touch. Looking forward to what you guys are going to do and build with Metrical.